Yesterday, I posted another critique of Alyssa Childers. I'm going to do one more today, and maybe I won't do any more for a while. We'll see. But in this one, I just want to go back to really the foundation of her entire pseudo ministry. So her pseudo ministry is built on attacking fellow Christians, those that she labels as progressive Christians, spreading false information or misinformation about them, claiming that they are, I'll say more about this in a moment, but malevolent wolves who are out to deceive and attack and destroy the church. It's the worst kind of rhetoric. He is like a soldier who built a military career by shooting at his or her own side. That's essentially what Alyssa Childers does, is she attacks fellow Christians, spreads paranoia and misinformation about them, and maybe disinformation. And she builds her ministry out of that, out of selling this false, harmful, toxic disinformation, misinformation. At the heart of her ministry, quote unquote ministry, or the foundation of it, is a story that she originally told in her first book, Another Gospel, and which she's often told since. And in this story, she and her husband in I think the late 2000s, they're like trying to find their way as a Christian couple, and they go to this church. And there's like this charismatic, winsome young pastor that invites them, who's the main teaching pastor of the church, invites them to join this group that he's starting where they're going to dig deeper into their faith. But then in the first meeting of this group, the pastor tells everybody that he's actually an agnostic. He doesn't really believe all this Christianity stuff, is the implication. And then over the next several months, he continues to raise questions that, in retrospect, Alyssa Childers believes were intended to simply undermine her Christian faith. She and her husband eventually leave that church. And years later, she writes Another Gospel as a clarion call to warn the faithful evangelical church that there is this malevolent evil force within the church which has infiltrated it, which is led by the devil. And these are liars and deceivers who pretend to be Christians, but whose real purpose is only to undermine and destroy the faith of God's true people. Now, if you think I'm overstating things, I'm not. That really is how she frames things. She presents people that she labels as progressive Christians, some of whom which would use that label, others of whom would not of themselves. For example, she's called Brian Zond a progressive Christian. Brian Zond has never called himself a progressive Christian, and he's a fully Orthodox Christian. He affirms the Nicene and Apostles' Creed, for example. But she labels people like this, and then she creates and perpetuates this paranoia. So she recently did an interview with a very popular YouTuber. I don't know him, but he's got over 1 million followers, which is 985,000 plus more followers than I have. He interviewed her, and the video begins with her sharing some of this story that I've just relayed to you. So what I want to do is I want to play a clip from that, and I want to give you a quote from her book, Another Gospel, where she talks more fully about this youth pastor, or this pastor, I should say, and others like him. And then I want to end with an appeal to you to see if maybe you can help me. So stay tuned for that.
And I had started going to this non-denominational church right in the heart of the Bible Belt where we live. And the pastor was very intellectual. And this seemed like the missing link for me. I thought, I don't really have intellectual reasons. This is going to be what connects me. So he invited me to be a part of a very small, very exclusive study and discussion group. And what I was totally unprepared for was that in the first class, he announced that he was agnostic. And yeah,
Whoa,
of
whoa.
course, this was, yeah,
What?
I know, right? Of course, all the red flags are flying. And I just thought, well, that's weird. That doesn't seem to make sense or line up with what I hear him saying on Sundays, but maybe he's just being really honest and we just need to support him and pray for him. Well, turns out he had already deconstructed his faith and was actually trying to actively get his parishioners into deconstruction so that he could convert them to progressive Christianity. And he was really good at it.
So So I'm curious real quick because that almost seems
Okay. So that's the sum total, the gist of it. The way that she phrases things here is progressive Progressive Christianity is another religion. In fact, she's quite explicit in the book Another Gospel that this is another religion altogether. It's not a form of Christianity, it is another religion and another gospel message. She says that that's central theme of the book. It is another religion. And deconstruction for her is the process, the malevolent process by which progressive Christian pastors who so they're another religion, they go undercover into churches and they seek to initiate a process of conversion to their false religion of progressive Christianity. That is this insane claim that is being made by Alyssa Childers. Okay, here is a key quote that I've excerpted from her book, Another Gospel, where she talks more about this pastor and others like him. He says these teachers would look like sheep, talk like sheep, walk like sheep, and act like sheep. But these sheepy looking beasts wouldn't be looking to snack on grass and clover. These would be carnivorous hunters looking to sink their chops into a nice, juicy sheep steak. While wheat and tares represent true believers and false ones, a predatory wolf is a whole different animal. This can be especially confusing for the flock when the wolf in question is dressed up as a shepherd, the one person with whom the sheep are conditioned to feel safe. In class, I felt as if the pastor was presenting himself as just another sheep, humbly seeking truth and pursuing God. In the beginning, I believed him, thought we were on the same page, and because he was my shepherd, quote unquote, who had won my respect and trust, I let my guard down. The paranoid, dehumanizing rhetoric here is off the charts. So these progressive Christian pastors are actually malevolent wolves who want to kill and eat God's sheep. Eating sheep steak is a metaphor here that she invokes. They want to feed on the sheep. I mean, this is just pure evil. Progressive Christians, on her account, are pure evil, predatory deceivers in God's uh, community in his among his sheep. And I have encountered time and again people who have been indoctrinated by deceivers, false teachers like Alyssa Childers and others who perpetuate this paranoid nonsense. And they attack me, not even knowing who I am, but they know that I'm a deceiver and a liar, and that I want to destroy God's church because Alyssa Childers told them so. Just generally speaking, this is one of the huge problems with the evangelical apologetic industrial complex is that it feeds off of creating paranoia and fear in its audience, in its constituency, a fear that the end of the world is nigh, that the forces of the devil are advancing under the aegis of, in an earlier age, it was the paranoia about the New Age movement, and then it was postmodernism, and then it was uh, progressive Christianity most recently, but I'm just trying to think of some of the other terms that have been used alongside progressive Christianity. So the emergent and emerging church, or what Brian McLaren once called a new kind of Christian, this kind of language really plays into this evangelical apologetic disinformation and misinformation campaign because they can take and distort what a new kind of Christian or progressive Christian or emergent or emerging Christian have meant and say, this is even worse than the New Age movement or postmodernism or the New Atheism, because it's not just outside the church. These people are actually inside the church. These are people posing as shepherds inside the church, and this freaks people out. right? So then they buy the book that Alyssa Childers is selling, and they go to the conference that she's speaking at, and they download and listen to the podcasts that she speaks on. And she builds her pseudo ministry off of spreading paranoia and misinformation and disinformation about fellow Christians. And it is, you cannot, how do you begin to calculate the negative, corrosive, destructive impact of what these people like Alyssa Childers are doing? It's really hard to overstate. And now to conclude, so let's just go back to the way that she describes in the podcast clip we watched. Her pastor described himself as an agnostic. I would have loved to have been in that meeting because I do not find, I'm going to assume for the sake of argument, for the sake of charity, I should say, that there is such a person that Alyssa Childers is referencing, that she didn't just make it all up. So I'm going to assume that there was an experience she had with a particular pastor, and some of these events happened in some respect. What I don't trust is that she is a reliable narrator of the things that happened. So, for example, did this pastor say, I'm an agnostic? Or did the pastor say, I'm not certain that exists or that Jesus rose from the dead? In other words, was he making a point about faith and creating a safe space for doubt and for questioning and for intellectual and spiritual growth through a process of being a Berean and questioning and having room for doubt and having the safe space for it? And then was that then distorted by Alyssa Childers to present him as a malevolent, evil, progressive Christian agnostic? And I'm very much suspect that she distorted in significant respects in her book and her subsequent interviews who this person was and what this pastor said to her and how he presented himself and what his true convictions were. And the reason I believe that she distorts this is because she is just categorically unreliable about everything she talks about. Again, claiming that progressive Christianity is another religion is just nuts. I'm a progressive Christian. I accept the Nicene Creed. I accept the Apostles' Creed. I taught for years at a evangelical Baptist seminary. Alyssa Childers doesn't have a clue what she's talking about. She makes stuff up, and I believe she makes stuff up about this pastor that so negatively, malevolently attempted to lead her astray, she claims, in the 2000s. This is where I would like the help of anybody who could help. I would love to speak, to identify with, and then speak to this pastor if they were interested and willing to do so, to understand what their perspective was, what their memory was. Maybe they were, in fact, a malevolent, evil deceiver who had infiltrated the church and only wanted to keep stake and kill God's true, faithful disciples. Or maybe they were a Christian on the way trying to figure things out. I would love to meet this person. I would love to speak with this person. I'd love to do interview with this person to get their perspective, because Alyssa Childers, for the last several years, has been telling the story and demonizing this person in her public statements without ever identifying them. So there's no way to evaluate what she says apart from general considerations of her credibility, which, in my view, are negligible. But I would love to speak with this person and understand their perspective. So if you know what church Alyssa Childers went to in the 2000s, the one that she's referring to, if you know who this pastor is, if you can identify them, reach out to me, let me know. I would love to learn more about that. And that's all I have for now. So check out my book again if you haven't read it, Progressive Christians Love Jesus Too, where I give an extensive critique of Alyssa Childers and her book, Another Gospel.